Good evening. I'm Erin Burnett. Out front tonight, Trump versus Putin. Who is telling the truth? President Trump, in a major surprise, opening his first ever sit down with the Russian President Vladimir Putin by raising the issue of Russian meddling in the 2016 election. Now, according to the Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, who was the only other American official in the room, Trump raised the issue, citing, quote, the concerns of the American people. Now, Putin denied the meddling, and the Russian foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, who was the only other Russian official in the room, says Trump, quote, heard and accepted Putin's denial. So if true, this is obviously stunning, right? I mean, did the President of the United States accept Putin's word against that of America's top intelligence officers? It is a fair question, because here is President Trump just 24 hours ago.
I think it was Russia, but I think it was probably other people and or countries. And I see nothing wrong with that statement. Nobody really knows. Nobody really knows for sure.
Except for they do. And tonight, a senior White House official is firing back at Putin's version, saying it's not true. Trump didn't accept the Russian president's denial. Here's one thing we do know, that Trump says it was an honor to meet Vladimir Putin.
President Putin and I have been discussing various things, and I think it's going very well. We look forward to a lot of very positive things happening for Russia, for the United States, and for everybody concerned. And it's an honor to be with you. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, the meeting between the two lasted for 2 hours and 15 minutes, which is a really important point. And I say that because it was only scheduled to last about 40 minutes. So it is very significant that it went so long. Jeff Zeleny is out front. He is traveling with the president in Hamburg, Germany tonight. And Jeff, look, obviously two very different versions. And I think it's really important for the American people to know which one is true. But no matter which is, the Trump administration is saying this meeting was a great success.
Well, good evening, Erin. I mean, it's not always that unusual after a bilateral meeting like this, a meeting between two leaders, for there to be different versions of events, particularly when there are only 6 people in that room. The two presidents, their secretaries of state, and translators. That is it. But the White House, without question, is explaining this as a win. And I think in some respects, it is in the sense that they had that long of a meeting. There's no doubt that relations are at very low levels between these two superpowers. So the fact that these presidents are talking together, that is certainly a good thing. But when you break down what they talked about Syria, of course, there are some developments there, a potential ceasefire in parts of Syria. But on that election interference, the fact that the president brought it up certainly will, kind of get rid of the elephant in the room, if you will. But how he brought it up is still going to be dissected in many ways here. He used the language that this concerns the American people. He never said, as far as we know, that this concerns him. And the reality here is that he, has reacted with so much more vigor and so much more anger in his attacks against virtually everyone else than Vladimir Putin over this. So once Republicans in Congress and Democrats as well start dissecting this, I think that will be one issue we're already hearing some concern about, that the president was not forceful enough about this election meddling. And the reality here is, I was at that briefing with Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, and he said they agreed to work forward to sort of eliminate cyber attacks and election hacks in the future. But unless the president says he is concerned about it and he is taking this as seriously, hard to imagine Vladimir Putin will as well. But so interestingly, Melania Trump. She came into the meeting about an hour in, and was sort of seeing how it was going, trying to get them to wrap up. They ended up going for an hour longer than that. But then tonight, she was sitting at dinner next to Vladimir Putin at a G20 summit dinner. Who knows if that's just by happenstance or if Melania Trump is now playing a key role in this key diplomatic dance.
All right. Thank you very much, Jeff. And Matthew Chance is in Moscow tonight. And Matthew, look, it is really important which of these versions is true. And the Russians say that what happened in that meeting between Putin and Trump was Trump acknowledged and accepted that the Russians didn't meddle in the 2016 election, right?
Right. Well, what Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, says is that President Trump accepted the statements made by Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, that Russia was not involved in the hacking, in the involvement in the trying to disruption of the U.S. political system, the U.S. election. He went on, and he's been quoted in state media saying that actually Trump said that the extent of the involvement by Russia in the election hacking had been exaggerated in some circles. And so that's what's being reported here in the state media in Russia, that President Trump actually sort of made that additional concession during that meeting with President Putin as well, saying that, look, Russia's role's been exaggerated. And you know what? That kind of tallies with what President Trump has been saying all along. I mean, we both know he's never fully accepted what US intelligence agencies say, which is that these election hacks were the responsibility of the work of Russia.
All right. Thank you very much, Matthew Chance. And as you point out, he hasn't. Everyone just heard the president say nobody really knows. Nobody really knows for sure, except for his own intelligence agencies, which all say beyond a doubt they do know for sure. Out front now, the Democratic Congressman Eric Swalwell, member of the House Intelligence Committee. Congressman, look, these are two extremely different versions of the Putin-Trump meeting. Putin's version, Trump accepts that Putin didn't do anything. Trump's version, Trump did not accept President Putin's claim. Who do you believe, Congressman?
Good evening, Aaron. I think there's an opportunity now, the ball's in the president's court, to refute what the foreign minister has said. If it's true that the president accepted Vladimir Putin's account, then we should know that. And if the president doesn't believe that what they're saying is true, he should say, no, I confronted Vladimir Putin. I told him we know what they did, and it's not acceptable. But the president's silence, as far as I'm concerned, tells us everything we need to know, which is the Russian account is the only account that's out there right now.
Right, and we certainly know that he has no fear of putting his own account out himself. He doesn't need someone else to do it. He can go on Twitter and do it himself. And maybe he will. But to this point, as you point out, Congressman, he has been silent. But it wasn't even clear, as you know, that Trump would even bring Russian meddling up, right? A lot of people thought he wouldn't. The White House indications were that he probably wasn't going to. But according to Secretary Tillerson, Trump opened the meeting with Putin. And I want to just read you Tillerson's words here by, quote, raising the concerns of the American people, end quote, regarding Russian interference in the 2016 election. Actually, that's where the quote ends. Are you satisfied with that description, raising the concerns of the American people?
He's right that it is a concern of the American people. 3/4 of the American people believe that there should be an investigation into what Russia did. But what's troublesome is that it does not appear that it is his concern. And then, Aaron, I have to ask, what are we getting as a country out of this relationship or this meeting with Russia? They attacked our democracy. They've made a mess of our country over the past 6 months. They've been given secrets in the Oval Office. They haven't changed their behavior in Syria or in Ukraine. So what is the United States getting? And right now it looks like this was just another win for Vladimir Putin.
As we've reported, the Russians feel emboldened because of the lack of retaliation from both President Trump and President Obama. I mean, there's another important thing here from the meeting today, Congressman. According to Secretary Tillerson, the Russians asked for, quote, proof and evidence that Russia was behind the election meddling. Here's Secretary Tillerson.
The Russians have asked for proof and evidence. I'll leave that to the intelligence community to address the answer to that question.
I'll leave that to the intelligence community to address. What do you make of that response, Congressman?
Well, the Intelligence Committee and community both put out a lot of evidence on this. They can go to my website, swalwell.house.gov. I connect all the dots as to Russia's interference in our election. But the real issue here, if you put aside the questions around whether people on the Trump team worked with Russia, let's just put that aside. No one disputes that Russia is going to do this again. And that's what I'm really concerned about, is the president doesn't seem to want to do anything to protect or secure future elections. And if you're a Republican or a Democrat, that should really worry you as we go into the November 2018 election cycle.
So, you just heard the president say nobody really knows for sure. Those are his words, whether the Russians meddled in the election, right? In response, the former chief of the DNI, James Clapper, said on CNN that comment threw the intelligence community under the bus. So when the Russians asked for proof today, and Tillerson's response was, well, that's up to the intelligence community. Did he just humiliate America's intelligence leaders directly to the Russian leader by not defending them?
It certainly didn't look like he was standing with our intelligence community. And Aaron, I also want to point out that the president's statement yesterday at the press conference, where he said that, the Russians did it, perhaps there were others, we'll never know, that sounded a lot like a statement he had made back in May of 2015 when he was confronted about evidence that the Russians had shot down that Malaysian Airlines flight over Ukraine. All of the evidence in the world showed that the Russians were a part of that, but candidate Trump at that time said, maybe the Russians did it, maybe the Ukrainians did it, we'll never know. And that we'll never know throwaway statement is really that's exactly what Russia wants him to say, and that plays right into the Russian playbook, is to just really sow doubt and make people question what is so obvious.
All right, Congressman Swalwell, I appreciate your time and thank you.
My pleasure, Aaron.
Next, Melania Trump, the one sent into the Putin-Trump meeting to try to end it as it went on and on and on, and the one sitting right next to Putin at dinner tonight. You'll see. Plus, Hillary Clinton's campaign chairman, John Podesta, rips into Donald Trump, calling him a whack job president, and Energy Secretary Rick Perry on supply and demand. His version of the theory is getting mocked tonight. Was it another oops moment or not?
Support for Out Front comes from our friends at Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans. Chances are you're confident when it comes to your work, your hobbies, and your life. Rocket Mortgage gives you that same level of confidence when it comes to buying a home or refinancing your existing home loan. With Rocket Mortgage, you can apply simply and understand fully, so you can mortgage confidently. To get started, go to rocketmortgage.com/outfront. Equal housing lender, licensed in all 50 states, NMLSconsumeraccess.org number 3030.
New tonight, President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin agreeing to, quote, move forward despite Russia's interference in the presidential election. Here's how the Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, put it.
What the two presidents, I think rightly, focused on is how do we move forward? How do we move forward from here? Because it's not clear to me that we will ever come to some agreed upon resolution of that question between the two nations. So the question is, what do we do now?
Is the question, what do we do now? Because here's what's happening right now. Current and former U.S. intelligence officials tell CNN Russia has ramped up its spy activity in the United States since the election. Nearly 150 spies in the United States right now. They say Russia is emboldened because of a lack of retaliation to its meddling in the U.S. election. And here's what the nation's top former spy had to say.
They're going to stretch the envelope as far as they can to collect information. And I think largely to, if I could use the military phrase, prep the battlefield for 2018 elections.
Out front tonight, the former chief of staff and director of policy planning for the former Secretary of State John Kerry, John Feiner, who's been in many meetings with the Russian president, former CIA director under Bill Clinton, former senior advisor to the Trump campaign, Director James Woolsey, and editor-in-chief of the Daily Beast, John Avalon. So, John, let me start with you. Is the president rightly focused, as Rex Tillerson says, on moving forward?
Not remotely sufficient. This is a meeting where he had a chance to sit down, not only show strength, but stand up for the integrity of the American system. And it seems that he got rolled, because whether or not you accept Lavrov's, rhetoric that he accepted the results, Tillerson himself said it's time to move on. Basically, this is a agree to disagree. That means that we're not going to inflict any pain upon the Russians going forward. That is an incitement to further incursions. And the fact that we've announced a cyber working group is an invitation to further mischief. This is a disastrous meeting from that result with the American people.
Director, last night we just saw James Clapper, right? He also said Russia's preparing the battlefield, that was what they were doing. That 2016 was they were testing a lot of things out, and 2018 is going to be the real battlefield. So should President Trump have accepted that what's bygones is bygones, let's just move ahead?
What he should have done was what Ronald Reagan did in the early 1980s when the Soviets were detected stealing some really sensitive and very important technology. Reagan and Casey said not a word. They just let the CIA fix that high-tech gear and let the Russians continue to steal it. And about 2 or 3 years later, as it started blowing up and taking out the entire Soviet pipeline all over Eurasia, Reagan and Casey smiled. That's the way to do it.
So you're saying don't mention anything about...
Don't mention anything if you can retaliate otherwise much more effectively. Now, if you have to mention something, I think you should be a bit grumpier than they were here. But mentioning something with the Russians doesn't do much good unless you're in a circumstance like the one I was lucky enough to be in 79, 80, 81, when their empire was collapsing because the Berlin Wall had fallen. I was running some negotiations. Let me tell you, the Russians were really nice when their empire had collapsed. That's what you want. And the best way to get that to happen now is probably to drive down the price of oil. That's the thing they care about the most.
So John, you've been in the room with Vladimir Putin many times. You were obviously with Secretary Kerry. The last time that President Obama and Putin met, there was a memorable icy stare, right? That was sort of the moment, we'll show it to everybody, that everybody remembers, which is, there's something about this. I mean, maybe it was just the moment, but it's obviously pretty nasty looking. Very different than today, okay? Trump and Putin laughing, smiling, big handshake, patting him on the back. I mean, it was a very, very different tone. Could Trump, though, actually be the one getting Putin right?
So I think we'll have to see. I think you're exactly right that the tone was completely different from the last few meetings that President Obama had with President Putin, and not only in what we saw on the camera, but in Secretary Tillerson's description of the meeting. He went out of his way, and this is the U.S. side characterizing the meeting as it sees fit and to its own advantage, right, as warm, as lots of good chemistry between the two leaders. That might not have been the way I would have chosen to characterize this meeting if people were already sort of suspicious that there was something going on with President Trump and President Putin. But the fact that they chose to do it that way, I think, is quite telling. And now we got to see what the U.S. does in the aftermath of this.
But this is, look, we've seen this movie before with different presidents. Vladimir Putin's been the constant with 4 presidents now. And both Bush and Obama began with an attempt at reset. Remember, I looked in his eyes, I saw his soul, a big reset button. Well, John McCain got it right. I looked in his eyes and I saw 3 letters, KGB. Right. So thinking that you can charm your way to a better relation, or that his fundamental interests as a nation or nature as an individual and a former officer are going to change is totally naive and dangerous from an American standpoint.
So, Director, this is something that Trump has sort of embraced. I think it seems as if he's seen it in a competitive way. Putin didn't like the other leaders of the United States, but he's going to like me, and that's going to change things, right? Here's President Trump in his own words.
He hates Obama. Doesn't hate us. I think he'd like me. I'd get along great with him, I think. If Putin likes Donald Trump, I consider that an asset, not a liability. It would be great if we could get along with Russia, just so you understand that. Now, tomorrow you'll say, Donald Trump wants to get along with Russia. This is terrible. It's not terrible. It's good.
It all depends on why the Russians want to get along with you. If they want to get along with you because you've just destroyed their empire, as we had effectively in a lot of ways in 1989, then that is fine.
But that doesn't seem to be what it is now. You have an emboldened Putin who's trying to expand his empire again.
Taken the steps necessary. We're sitting on our hands and have been for a long time, just kind of smiling and nodding. And some meetings they go better. Other meetings, doesn't matter. What you have to do is undermine their power. You do that, you'll get along really nicely with them. They have, and people talk about 150 new spies. Pachepa, the head of Romanian intelligence, defected back in 79. And he had with him a huge amount of materials which got Ceausescu hanged in Romania. But one of the things he has were their complete plans for what they call disinformatia, which is essentially a massive lying program. They have more, Pachepa said, and he was the head of their intelligence service, they have more people involved in disinformation than they do have men and women in uniform.
And you think that's still true with the Russians?
I see no reason to believe that it's not. They are absolutely committed to a massive lie about the United States, which they call their great enemy. And we basically need to undercut that strategy and that approach.
But the way that these meetings go, I would assume, John, is Putin says what he's going to say. I didn't do it. They have this personable meeting.
You can't start.
And does Trump know that that's a lie?
You can't start with a meeting.
He knows it. I mean, the question isn't whether he can get along with Russia. In some ways, that's the easy part. If you're doing what they want you to do and saying the kinds of things publicly that they want you to say, like, who knows who hacked the election, you'll get along with them fine. The question is what he can get out of Russia. Right. And we really have to be looking forward. The Secretary Tillerson, the most disturbing part of his comments was that this thing that happened in the election is a matter of history, that we want to understand about the past. The reason we want to understand what happened in that election is so we can protect the country now, in 2018, in 2022, not some academic
because
exercise.
Let's just be clear. We know that they were trying to access sensitive voter data. They could have been trying to affect
at least
votes.
21
There's
states.
no evidence that they affected any kind of vote itself. But clearly that was among the goals.
Yes.
So if you didn't get it right the first time, maybe you get it right the next time.
Especially since they have 16 months only to get through figuring out how to hack into the machines.
But more importantly, I mean, the horse they backed, what they wanted to advance for whatever reason, succeeded, right? And I think it's one of the reasons the administration has discomfort in confronting this issue, because they were unwittingly the beneficiaries of this. Yes. But more importantly, as the director keeps pointing out, the Russians respond to leverage, to pain points. And the question is there any evidence at all that this administration is going to try to inflict a degree of pain within diplomatic spheres to change the Russians' behavior? The answer is None. None that we've seen, none that we've heard, especially from the
I
president.
think the president has the right temperament to do that, but I haven't seen it yet, and I don't think you have either.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Pretty sobering words. I appreciate it. Next, why was President Trump talking about John Podesta and the 2016 election when he was getting ready to meet with world leaders here in 2017 at the G20? And remember when Rick Perry forgot one of the government agencies he wanted to cut?
The third one I can't. Sorry. Oops.
Did Perry top that moment or not?
Mondays on TNT. Enter the provocative world of a young William Shakespeare in TNT's new drama series, Will.
We are at war, and our only weapons are words.
Told with a revolutionary visual style and modern soundtrack, the series celebrates all the love, lust, history, and brilliance of William Shakespeare. TNT's new series, Will, airs Mondays at 9, starting July 10th on TNT and on the TNT app.
New tonight, President Trump sparking a new fight in the midst of his high-stakes overseas trip. This time, taking to Twitter, of course, to attack Clinton's former campaign chair just before he sat down with the Russian President Vladimir Putin. So at a time when Trump was trying to get praise for being presidential, why go on Twitter to spark a new feud with someone from the past? Alex Marquardt is out front.
President Trump has prided himself on being a non-traditional American president, but few things are more traditional than foreign visits. At his first stop in Europe, Trump won praise for new lines in his speech supporting NATO and calling out Russia.
We urge Russia to cease its destabilizing activities in Ukraine and elsewhere, and its support for hostile regimes, including Syria and Iran.
Is there any question from the U.S. side?
But the old Trump was still there, railing on the media.
They have been fake news for a long time.
And tweeting today out of the blue about Hillary Clinton's campaign manager, saying, everyone here is talking about why John Podesta refused to give the DNC server to the FBI and the CIA. Disgraceful. Podesta responding, calling Trump a whack job, adding, dude, get your head in the game. You're representing the U.S. at the G20.
I think Donald Trump is becoming a more of a world leader. He's clearly has a lot of the protocol down pat. I think he enjoys getting out of Washington, D.C. At times he does well at these events, but he ends up ruining things by an odd tweet or using the word honor when meeting Putin. And then that becomes the headline. It seems like a botched job.
That handshake with Putin, the most highly anticipated meeting of the year. Then the more formal sit-down, and
it's an honor to be with you.
I think it's kind of strange that President Trump talks about what an honor it is to meet Vladimir Putin. Putin is somebody who has ordered a hacking of our elections in 2016, who is a global menace to American interest. So the danger for Trump is in meeting of Putin, wanting to show a amount of respect. He perhaps is overdoing it.
The upbeat mood in stark contrast with Putin's last meeting with an American president, just as the U.S. was accusing Russia of meddling in last year's presidential election. On the global stage, with the eyes of the world watching, the stakes are higher, the dance a delicate one. Trump's international learning curve has been a minefield. Accused of curtsying or bowing to the King of Saudi Arabia.
Secretary of State
while in Israel, telling its president,
we just got back from the Middle East,
prompting a facepalm from Israel's ambassador to the U.S. According to sources, he shared classified information to Russian adversaries in the Oval Office while ignoring the outreach of friends. Then, the shove seen around the world, pushing aside the Prime Minister of Montenegro.
This has gotten him to the White House. Whether it'll get him to be seen as a successful president is what we're all sitting and waiting to see.
But few are waiting to see whether President Trump dramatically changes that behavior, whether at home or abroad. Instead, he seems to want to change what presidential means. He recently defended his use of social media, which, as he did today, has so often gotten in the way of the bigger message, saying on Twitter, of course, that the way he uses social media is not presidential, it's modern-day presidential. Aaron?
All All right, Alex, thank you very much. Well put. And now let's go to the former Republican Congressman Jack Kingston, who's also a former senior advisor for the Trump campaign, and Van Jones, former special advisor to President Obama. Congressman, let me start with you in this Podesta fracas. The president tweeting, everybody is talking about John Podesta. Our Jeff Zeleny is traveling with the president, says that nobody is talking about Podesta over there, which would make sense because why would you be? Why does the president, what does he gain by tweeting that?
Yeah, I think, Aaron, he has the ability to play games or, on lots of different levels. And I don't mean a game necessarily, although Van might say it is a game. But I think he does keep people off balance. He's unpredictable. It's something that the American people are captivated by. And they enjoy the fact that he is like the rest of us when we get on our own Twitters. We say emotional things. We say spontaneous things. And in this case, I have to say, it's a substantive question.
Or we consider it unprofessional and we don't. But that's some of us.
Well, yes, some would, but look at Podesta's response to him. He got down in the gutter immediately and called the president of the United States a whack job. So, but I think it's a substantive question. Why isn't there an investigation about Podesta when he was on the government payroll, sitting on the board of a company that was doing business with
Fair to raise
Russia?
That question today, right before the Putin meeting, Van?
No, it's not. Part of what's so sad is that this is a summer when the United States is facing probably its gravest threat since World War II. We have an actual madman in North Korea with actual nuclear missiles who is apparently now able to hit Hawaii and Alaska, American soil. That should be full stop the agenda for the United States, to rally the world to stop the threat. I have no love lost for George W. Bush, but when he just thought that Saddam Hussein might have weapons of mass destruction, he rallied the world. He tried to, at least. We are in a situation where somebody who, listen, if on Saddam Hussein's worst day, he could still be the psychiatrist for Kim Jong-un. This guy is totally crazy, and we're not talking about real threats. We're talking about John Podesta. We're talking about John Podesta this summer. It's nuts.
But Van, that's the genius of Donald Trump. He's not talking about John Podesta. His critics are. What he's talking about is selling Patriot missiles to Poland. He's talking about NATO putting in more money in their defense budget. He's the guy who dropped 59 Tomahawk missiles in Syria on Russian-backed troops.
Listen, when you are in your little bathtub with your rubby ducky and telling yourself these stories, that's wonderful, and I'm sure it sounds great to you.
But
the rest of the country is looking.
I don't have any rubber duckies. That's interesting you would say that. Speaking of pulling a debate to the high ground.
The rest of the country is looking at what they're actually seeing, which is somebody who, when he's given a script and something to say and to do, he apparently can do a decent job. But the minute that he runs into the restroom or into the closet and can get his phone out, he starts doing nutty stuff. And it's not good for America. And you can't pretend it's good for America. There's nothing genius about it. If this is genius, then we got a bunch of genius kindergartners.
Van, I actually was thinking about you yesterday, and I am absolutely being serious about this. You said during his State of the Union address that he became the President of the United States. I think yesterday his address to Poland was just as important. I think it was a magnificent speech. Even Democrats on some of the charts showed it. They gave him a C. Republicans, of course, gave him an A+, but independents gave him a B on it. That's what multiple focus groups said that, because I think it was such a great speech. It did
I'm glad that you're proud of that speech. I think he has been presidential the whole time. Nixon was president the whole time, and he had very little respect for that office. And I think Donald Trump, when he does stuff like this, shows little respect for the office. He shows little respect for the American people. And I'm going to tell you, I just want to say one last thing. The summer before 9/11, we spent the whole summer talking about Gary Condit and Shonda Levy and distracting ourselves while enemies plotted and gathered. And I'm telling you right now, you've got a plot gathering against this country from North Korea, and we're talking about everything but that because
a lot
of
of the
your
headlines.
president.
Okay, hold on. Let me just get in here. The headlines that Trump got. From today, on the day of the tweet, right? Trump confronts Putin on election hacking. U.S. and Russia reach a deal on Syria ceasefire. U.S. labor market roars back. I mean, these are from CBS News, The Washington Post, The New York Times. I mean, I guess they're all fake news, right? So it must all be untrue, Congressman. Although I bet that the president would be happy to accept these headlines because they flatter him. Go ahead.
Well, I think he will. I think this is just part of Donald Trump, and those who dislike him and those who love him just have to accept it as part of him. But I do think what he is doing right now in Europe is very important, and I agree with Van. North Korea should be an international focal point, and that's why sitting down with President Putin is so important, and yet the American press seems to some of the people who were on your last panel, for example, Aaron, who did not think he raised the Russian issue enough. I would have hope
one
that
of
have
those
equal
people
curiosity.
was the former CIA director and Trump advisor, Director Woolsey. So a far cry from natural Trump credit.
But they should be equally as concerned. Well, how much time in this 2-hour meeting, which was supposed to be a 30-minute meeting, how much time was dedicated to North Korea, and how much was dedicated to terrorism? How much was dedicated to Syria? And I think that should be more of a focal point than did he press enough. And by the way, I can't believe that they're going to accept Lavrov's word over Tillerson. It's just unbelievable to me.
Go ahead, Van. Final word.
Well, I just think that we have to respect the fact that, yeah, the president got some stuff right on this trip. That's great. People, listen, I think most Americans would love to see him do that kind of stuff. But nobody can look at only one side of the sandwich. You got to look at both sides. And when the other side has a whole bunch of crap in it, it's hard to eat that meal.
All right. Thank you both very much. I appreciate it. And next, the Energy Secretary Rick Perry gave a lesson on economics. Did he have another oops moment or not? And Trump and Putin agree on a ceasefire in Syria. We go to the ground in Raqqa to find out if it's really happening. An exclusive look at the battle against ISIS.
Heyo! Trey Kirby here from The Starters, and I'll be joined by Skeets, Tass, and Lee in Las Vegas for NBA Las Vegas Summer League live on NBA TV. July 7th through 11th. After that night's final game, we'll talk to some of the top rookies in the 2017 draft class, and more than likely, we're going to give them a cake. What are they going to do with that cake? Only way to find out is by watching.
New tonight, the Energy Secretary Rick Perry being mocked for saying this in response to a question about the American shale gas boom.
Well, here's a little economics lesson, that supply and demand. You put the supply out there, and the demand will follow that.
So, again, that was about shale gas. He made the comment during a visit to a coal plant in West Virginia. So was it another oops moment for Perry, or is he actually right? Out front now, former senior economic advisor of the Trump campaign and CNN senior economics analyst Stephen Moore and John Avlon also back with me. So Steve, let me start with this. Secretary Perry says you put the supply out there, demand will follow. Obviously, with lots of things in the economy, that's a pretty silly thing to say. He's talking about shale gas and the energy market. Are people right to mock him or not?
I don't really see why there's any controversy here. Sure. Anytime you have an increase in supply, then what happens to the price, Aaron, when you have an increase in supply?
Right. Well, it plunges,
it
as
goes
we've seen
down,
with
right?
shale gas.
We had a big increase in the supply, a huge increase, 75% increase in American production. And remember, here's a number for you. In 2014, the price of oil hit a high at $105 a barrel. Today, the price of oil is about, $45 to $50. Yep. So we've seen a 50% decline in the price of oil. So what does that do? It means the increase, you've had a huge surge in demand for oil because it's cheap. And in fact, what's happening in the energy markets right now is the huge boom in the shale oil and gas are really decimating all the other areas. Everybody's using shale gas. It's hurting nuclear. It's hurting wind. It's hurting solar.
So you're making the case, right, Steve, that when it comes to energy markets, and obviously some of them might be different than others. Coal obviously is more complex. He was at a coal plant. But again, the question was about shale gas. That an increase in supply, because people want to drive, they'll then buy more gas, they'll drive more. So you're saying in the case that Rick Perry's talking about, he's right and not ridiculous.
Yeah, so what happened was the big increase in the supply over the last 5 or 6 or 7 years has led to a reduction in price and a big increase in people are using more oil and gas and less of the alternative. So I think he got his economics exactly right. I'm going to give him an A.
Great. Thank you, Professor. But let's see if we can find some common ground here, right? Yeah. Let's build it up. First of all, you acknowledge that he got the basic equation. When he said, let me give you a basic lesson in economics, that he got the equation backwards. As a general rule, you acknowledge that, right?
No. Well, what do you mean? Explain.
Well, look, you're making the argument that the normal laws of supply and demand are inverse when it comes to energy because increased supply will lead to lower costs, which will increase demand. Now, that may be a very fair, smart, nuanced point to make with regard to energy. Problem is Rick Perry was making a much broader point.
That's true of every industry, yes. And when you have an increase in supply of something, then the price goes down, it becomes more affordable, and people will buy more of it.
Right.
Well, assuming they want it. I mean, there's some products.
Yeah, I
but
mean, they have
like
to want it. That's true. That is true.
I think, look.
But they want energy. I mean, that's the point. And the question was about shale gas, just to be clear. It was about shale gas.
We're bending over backwards, to be fair here, folks. But let's also just acknowledge the obvious. The man misspoke. He screwed it up. He got it backwards. And so I think when you try to spin it to make him look like a secret genius, it doesn't exactly ring true.
Do you think that that's true, Steve? Or do you think, look, he's the governor of Texas. He knows the oil and gas market. And he meant what he said.
Aaron, that's just what I was going to say. If there's anybody who knows the oil market, it's the guy who was the governor of Texas during this boom. And you just saw so many jobs created in Texas. And look, I don't know exactly the point, that he was trying to make there, but it is true that we've had a big increase in jobs. We've had a big increase in, the great thing that's happening in the energy market right now is that we're now exporting oil for the first time. A big story in the Wall Street Journal about that. So, that's all good. And the increase in supply and the technology is made that all possible.
Right, but Steve, you'd acknowledge also that in the last decade, when we've had a shale gas boom, which has had enormous positive economic impact, the price of oil and gas at the pump hasn't consistently gone down, right? I mean,
it has the last we've gone.
It has fluctuated from $4 over periods.
But it's gone down. It's been down now for 3 years. Remember 3 years ago we were at almost $4 a gallon. Now in most states we're down to $2. That's a big saving to the American consumer.
Part of this though, John, is political in the sense that it was Rick Perry.
Sure.
Okay. And that's part of the reason it's getting so much attention. He has been accused of, not accused, he has committed a gaffe before.
Well, are you talking about when he couldn't name the cabinet?
So let me just, for those who haven't been watching television for the past few years, let us replay it.
Oh, the greatest.
Oh.
The third agency of government, I would do away with the education, the commerce, and let's see, I can't. The third one I can't. Sorry. Oops.
Is he a victim of being stereotyped, John?
Yes, he is. You screw up your own cabinet position in that public a forum, that's going to leave a mark, folks.
And that's part of why we're seeing what we're seeing now. All right, thank you both very much. I appreciate it. And out front next, on the verge of what they say, the Putin and Trump, is a ceasefire in Syria, we are on the ground, rare and exclusive access to the ISIS stronghold. And then on a much lighter note, this. You remember this? We'll count down to CNN's series The 90s. One of the stars of 90210 comes out front.
Hi, everyone. This is Michaela Pereira. I am hosting a brand new podcast called CNN's The Rewind 90s Edition. It starts on July 6th, and together we'll journey back to the era of VHS movie nights to discover how the 90s still leaves its mark on us today. Find out more at cnn.com/the90s.
New tonight, President Trump striking a deal with the Russian President Vladimir Putin. They're agreeing to try and stop the violence that has ravaged Syria. And tonight, in an exclusive report, CNN takes you to the heart of the deadly war against ISIS tonight. Nick Payton-Walsh is out front in northern Syria. And Nick, you are actually there. They can talk about making a deal, but you're actually seeing what it means. The U.S. Secretary of State, Tillerson, says there's a ceasefire now in southwest Syria. You've been covering this war, and you're there now. Will it hold?
Unclear, really, at this point, Erin. We've seen so many ceasefires come and go in this 5-year war in Syria. In the south, we're talking about some of the lesser tense areas. It's tense, yes, and there are conflicts there, particularly between Syrian regime militia and Syrian rebels with the U.S. backing down there. We've seen a lot of tension there, often even with U.S. trainers in the midst. And there have been requirements between Moscow and Washington to talk to try and calm that kind of thing down. So this deal, when it comes into effect, we learn more detail about it, may well go further to calm that down too, and perhaps as well to reduce some of the tension with jihadists in their midst as well. It will also make a key US ally to the south, Jordan, more comfortable too. But does it hold? No. The key takeaway, though, is the first time Trump and Putin meet and talk Syria, they seem to get on the same page quite quickly. Remember the Obama administration, they wanted Bashar al-Assad out. Well, Secretary Tillerson today saying he will leave eventually, Bashar al-Assad, but that's not the tenet of their policy here, Erin.
No, it certainly isn't. Of course, every leader will leave eventually. It sort of doesn't say anything at all from the U.S. to make that statement. Also tonight, Nick, you are where international forces have been tightening their grip around the ISIS declared capital of Raqqa. What is the situation there?
Well, it's extraordinary how fast the progress seems to be in the outskirts of Raqqa. I mean, the area we went through today to travel to the old city, about 3 or 4 kilometres that appear to have fallen to the Syrian, Kurdish and Arab forces that are backed by US air power and even at some point distant artillery too. That seemed to have fallen in the last 3 weeks or so, and it was the last few days that a coalition airstrike punched 2 holes in the ancient wall around the old city of Raqqa. That itself is a very dense area, but remarkably, those coalition-backed forces have pushed quite quickly into the old city, about 300 or 400 metres inside already so far. And that means really that the part of Raqqa that ISIS still hold is about 1.5 miles across, as far as we can tell by some of the maps that we saw. That isn't particularly big at all. Yes, it's a very dense urban area they hold. They are slowed down, these coalition-backed forces, by the fact they can't do much fighting in the day. It's too hot. They're pinned down by ISIS snipers. At night, though, we saw ourselves a lot of air power in the skies moving in towards that city. That's when the coalition's main advantage comes into play. They are moving quite fast. Whether or not the thousands of civilians are supposed to be in that city slow the further advance, now they get into more dense urban areas, we will have to see. Raqqa, very symbolic for them, their capital, but it seems, falling quicker than personally I'd expected in the outskirts. Possibly, though, nastier work ahead, Erin.
All right. Thank you very much, Nick Peyton Walsh, from there on the ground, actually seeing what's happening. Thank you. And next, back to the 90s with a preview of this awesome new series. Isn't that a word from the 90s? I'll talk to one of the stars of Beverly Hills 90210.
She's cute. Yeah, it's my ex-girlfriend. What happened? I dumped her.
Tonight, we are counting down to CNN's next original series, The 90s, a decade home to one of the most popular teen soaps of all time, Beverly Hills 90210.
You know what you are, Wilson? No, big man, why don't you tell me? You're a has-been.
Out front now, Ian Ziering, who, of course, played Steve Sanders on 90210. That was a funny moment. Look, to many, you're still known. You're forever known as Steve Sanders. Did you have any idea when 90210 first started that it would take off and become such a cultural phenomenon the way it did?
I could have never imagined that it would achieve the success that it ultimately found. The premiere episode didn't get such great reviews, so I thought pretty shortly after that I was going to be looking for more work. Fortunately, the fans really picked up the baton and ran for 10 years with it.
I mean, when you watch these clips, 90210 inspired, look, it captured the moment of how teenagers feel, but it also inspired teen fashion at the time and had its own albums. What do you think the lasting impact of Beverly Hills 90210 was?
It was an original concept. It was a teen drama that dealt with reality. All the struggles that we deal with during teenage life, we dealt with it in a very real, topical way, and it kind of bridged a gap. I mean, there's even whispers now of getting the cast back together and doing it all over again.
Now, I have to ask you also, because you were on Celebrity Apprentice, among many things that you've done, and I just wanted to play, Ian, one clip, obviously a pretty important clip, from the boardroom. Here it is.
How did your jingle go, Ian? Can you remember it?
I can. Mangarita, raspberita, might sound crazy, but it's true. It's a new thing with a cool zing from the king of beers to you.
But Ian, that's La Cucaracha. You're copying it. Ian, you're fired.
Fired for La Cucaracha. Hopefully you have recovered from the scarring experience that must have been. What was your experience with Trump on the show, Ian?
I found him to be very friendly, very nice, funny. You know, this is before any of his aspirations or known aspirations for political office. He was a nice guy.
All right. Well, Ian Ziering, thanks so much. I appreciate it. Thanks for being with me.
Thank you so much, Erin. Bye, everybody.
And you can also catch Ian Ziering on Sharknado 5. And don't miss the premiere of the 90s Sunday night at 9, only here on CNN.